All right, and let's get this show on the road so that when you are done, when we are done, you will be able to go and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening. So let's get this puppy in present mode. We are ready to go. All right, welcome to our Florida update. I'm Andrea Miller. I'm the founding board member and the executive director of Center for Common Ground. If we've got new people joining us, we run a lot of campaigns through Center for Common Ground. We've got our internship campaign, Students for Justice. This is the home of the original Reclaim Our Vote campaign. The Vote Equality campaign is here, our Democracy Center campaign. I've got news from the Vote Equality campaign. They are readying not a new RV, but a new Sprinter van, and that Sprinter van will be heading to Nevada, and they expect to be in Nevada starting in mid-September. So if you know anybody that's organizing in Nevada, send me a note, let me know, and I'll be sure to pass that along to our Vote Equality people. In the event that we've got some new people that are on the call, Center for Common Ground, we have a very simple mission statement. We want to educate and empower underrepresented voters in voter suppression states to be able to engage not only in elections and advocate for their own right to vote, but to fully participate in democracy. And then that way we can build a democracy that prioritizes the voices of all people. And all means all, y'all. It means everybody. I'm going to do a special thank you to my board, Reverend Rodney Sadler and Dr. Gabby Lemus, who are board co-chairs, Deepak Puri, who's the co-founder of the Dem Labs, Katie Hornung, who is the co-founder of what does that say? Vote Equality. And currently, she also has Momentum Printing. So she does a lot of printing for us now. I also want to thank our faith partners and our other partners, the Religious Action Center on Reform Judaism, the Unitarian Universalists with the UU The Vote campaign, United Church of Christ, the Workers' Circle, and the American Ethical Union. As a 501c3, we do our work in a nonpartisan fashion. We support voters, and that means that faith organizations can work side by side with us. And then also want to thank our partners at Movement Labs. And I had a really great conversation with Cliff Albright, but we're not going to be talking about Ohio tonight. We're going to save Ohio. Tonight, we're going to be showering a lot of love on the great state of Florida. All right, now in 2022, what do we expect and hope to be able to do? We want to be able to do outreach to 13 million, and we are probably going to change this to Black voters, and these will be voters who are infrequent voters. We had originally planned on doing a broader outreach, reaching out to more voters, and what we're seeing in some of our target states is there is more of a need for us to do major outreach to Black voters who have not voted since 2016 and are in danger of being dumped off the voting rolls. So we are going to need to have 50,000 active working volunteers. We just signed our contract to officially do our expansion into Florida with Florida partners on the ground. So we are officially partnered with State Voices Florida, and we will be working on more Florida partnerships later. I'm adjusting our numbers. We've already sent 1 million postcards. So by the time we are done with the general, I think we should be at around 3.5 million postcards to voters. Remember, this is not a presidential year. This is a midterm election. We're going to increase the number of calls we made over last year to 2.5 million. And we're going to send 7 million text messages. Boy, is that going to be expensive, but we're going to work on it. So if you have not volunteered with us as yet, you can go to our website, centerforcommonground.org, or we have a special short URL, cfcg.news/volunteer. And when you do that, this form will come up and you can fill it out. Now, we have a new limited edition postcard that is only available for people who buy their postcards from Momentum Printing. These are normally going to be individuals or people who need less than 500 postcards. The artist, Chuck Sperry, has granted a limited copyright, but only to Momentum Printing. So we can't give this to Vista Print. So for those of you who are planning on doing just a small number of postcards, this brand new postcard for 2022 will be available for you. Now, most of our southern states, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, even Arizona, North Carolina, and South Carolina, they are all unratified states. All right, now, what have we done so far? So far, we have assigned more than 1 million postcard addresses to writers. And these are the numbers that I just got today. So in Alabama, we've assigned 154,000 cards, in Georgia, 221,000, in North Carolina, 86,000, in Florida, 578,000. Now, again, realize normally we don't postcard for primaries. So all these numbers represent cards and addresses that have been assigned for our primary elections. So we are going to be looking to beat these numbers. We also have more states when we really start looking at the general election. And I realize I left Virginia out. Now, our campaign dates, what are we going to be writing? Virginia's early voting begins on September 23rd. So right now, we are writing postcards to Virginia. And that campaign will continue through October 1st. Now, remember, we're going to be working in 9 states. So what we're doing is we're doing smaller numbers of postcards. We're not postcarding all the voters. We're postcarding the inconsistent voters. We will be launching North Carolina on August 5th. Georgia will come right behind it on August 12th. And then we will be working out the schedule of when we will launch the other states. And a lot of it is going to be based on when do they begin early voting. These 3 states have early voting. And there is a link. If you want to read more, you can go to centerforcommonground.org postcarding, and you can get all the detail that you want. Now, our states and what we're looking at. When we originally picked our states, we had no idea who would be the statewide candidates for Senate. As an organization that is community of color led, it was and is pretty amazing when we look at the number of Black Senate candidates that are on the ballot. Georgia has already had their primary, and so Reverend Warnock and Herschel Walker, Georgia will be fielding 2 Black U.S. Senate candidates. The Florida primary election will be August 23rd. It is very likely that Val Demings will be the nominee. Alabama has already had their primary, and the winner is Reverend Will Boyd. In North Carolina, they've already had their primary, and the winner is Justice Sherry Beasley. And the number that is over on the side, you've probably seen those numbers before, but now when there's not a lot of other stuff around them and they're kind of big, you can see this is going to be a very interesting election by the numbers. It's going to be very interesting. Florida is already a majority minority state, and these percentages are registered voters, meaning if they held the election tomorrow, these folks would be able to vote in it. We've got a couple more races. In Louisiana, Gary Chambers is likely to be the Senate candidate. Now, young people are really flocking to Gary Chambers. The guy looks fun. He's cool. He's got some amazing inventive ads. Louisiana is another state that is already majority minority. And then in South Carolina, we have another race where we have 2 Black Senate candidates pitted against each other, Crystal Matthews and Tim Scott. One of the things my uncles told me when I was very young, I had 2 uncles who were aldermen in the Daily Machine, was that in order to win elections, or he who wins elections, remember this was in the 60s and women didn't really do what I'm doing. He who wins the election is the person who gets their voters out. So it will be our goal to get our voters out. When we look at historic voting trends, especially among Black voters. Black voters tend historically, when they vote, to be 85% on the Dem side and 15% on the Republican side. That is just history. So again, when we look at the numbers, this is looking like a banner year for not only Black candidates, but candidates who are tending on the progressive side. So when we look at our issues, we want voting rights, we want clean climate, we have an opportunity to bring in a slate of candidates from the South, no less, that will be supportive of what our ideals are. All right, now let's get to the great state of Florida because I promised you details. All right, now in Florida in 2022, what's on the ballot? They've got a U.S. Senate seat, their entire U.S. House, all 28 seats. There's a governor and their entire General Assembly, 120 seats in the state House, 40 seats in the Senate. Their primary election is August 23rd. Early voting begins August 13th in all counties. Some counties may begin early voting as early as August 8th. Now, what's Florida look like in terms of registered voters? I will tell you now, when I generated these numbers originally back in March, Florida had 13.9 million registered voters. Sometime between now and March, Florida purged their voting rolls and they dropped 600,000 voters. Florida now has 13.3 million registered voters. So when we look at Florida, yes, the largest population are Caucasian voters. However, when we look at the Black and the Hispanic population of Florida, those numbers are very, 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 very large. I'm going to switch the slide to what we're looking at today. So today, again, the numbers are still very large. The Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders were the only voting bloc where they actually gained voters. All of the other voting groups lost voters. But again, Florida should still be a very, very, very strong state if we are able to turn out the voters. One of the things people always ask me is when we're looking at the Hispanic vote in Florida, how many folks are Cuban? Out of this 2.3 million, we know that roughly 400,000 are Cuban. So there are plenty of Hispanic voters who may just need that push to the polls. There is no ethnic group where they are a monolith, where everybody that's X is going to vote one way or the other. But we know that if we turn out big numbers, we know where the numbers trend. All right, now we've already gone through that. Let's look at where our opportunities are in Florida. So if these are the number of voters that there are based on race in Florida, and these are the voters who did not vote in 2018, I'm going midterm to midterm. Remember, presidential years are always really, really strange things. You've got a lot of people who are 1 out of 3 voters. They only show up on presidential years. So I don't get to look at the presidential year. I have to go back to the last midterm, 2018. So we're seeing 26% of Black voters did not vote in 2018, 27% of the Hispanic voters, 23% of our AANHPI voters, and 27% of Native Americans did not vote. So what does that mean? That means we have voters to turn out. We have bigger numbers that if we get these voters out, these numbers statewide really, really, really add up. All right, Gabe, you're here. Do you want to talk about phone banks? And Florida phone banks are actually here. This is the old slide. So Gabe, you want to unmute and let people know where we are.
Yeah, so the Arizona election is on Tuesday. So after that point, we're just going to be doing Florida primary phone banks for a few weeks. So now's the time to get started with that. We are calling into a couple counties, or one county and one city, and we're going to keep expanding that, as we get more and more callers. Um, and our data is better than it's ever been for Florida. We have a better source of data. So, and that includes for groups of young voters as well, which has almost never been good. So we're leaving plenty of voicemails, and we're talking to some people as well. And I wanted to, just in case people here hadn't seen this graphic, we did a study on Virginia on the efficacy of voicemails in phone banking, because that's one of the things that makes our phone banks unique. And we found that it resulted in a 6% bump in turnout. Just the voicemails and conversations resulted in a 17.3% bump in turnout. So this is huge. I was looking at some postcarding efficacy data today among other organizations, and it looks like it gives a couple percentage points depending on where you're postcarding in. But if you want a 6% percentage bump in turnout, phone banking is the way to go. So we have phone bank trainings every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday right now. And I'm going to post in the chat the link to our phone bank page, just so anyone can go there. It has our trainings, so you can sign up. It has the description of the phone banks we're doing. And as we get closer to the general, we're going to add more and more states so that we're covering all of our states.
All right. Anything else, Gabe?
That's pretty much it. We're looking to do some similar studies like that. That was in a group of over 10,000 people we left voicemail for. So the numbers are really starting to get significant there. And we had conversations with over 1,000 Black voters in Virginia. So those are those stats. And yeah, I'm going to post the phone bank link in chat now.
All right, great. I'll go back. The postcard leadership team is here. Postcard team, do any of you want to add anything? If not, I will entertain questions, and then I'll talk about texting.
I think what you said about postcards was good. Thank you. And we do it regionally, depends on where you live. We do it through regional organizers, and we will, there's a link on the website as to where you can find your regional organizer, because a lot of places have someone that already has postcards that they can provide you. Otherwise, you get them yourself.
And
All
also,
right.
I'll add that we still have a week and a half to write to Florida. So we can get in some more Florida before we go on to Virginia. We're overlapping now. We're doing the home stretch on Florida and the beginning on Virginia. but lots of voters in Florida, obviously a consequential state. So write your cards.
All right, all right. And we've got a question in the chat. Do we know how long we'll be writing postcards to Georgia once the campaign launches?
Nancy just answered that.
Yeah, usually till about 10 days before early voting ends, because we really ask people to vote early. And so we're not doing it 10 days until the November 8th election. We're usually doing it 10 days or so before early voting ends, so that they make sure to get that postcard in their hands prior to early voting in person. Alabama does not have early voting, but most of the other states do.
All right, yes. And one of the things that we rolled out in 2021 at Center for Common Ground are democracy centers. Democracy center is basically equivalent to what the other side calls community centers. And they have been very, very, very aggressive with community centers in Florida, Texas, and now they're going into Georgia with community centers in Black communities as well as Asian American communities. So we have had some phenomenal turnout numbers from our democracy centers that are currently in Virginia. And when we do the information and the mobilization for Georgia, you will hear from our Team Unity folks that are working in 58 counties in Georgia. And our main focus will really be going outside the Atlanta area. So when we are working, we normally try to work outside the main large cities because the party will be there, many progressive groups will be there. Our sweet spot is normally the more rural areas where there really aren't very many organizations working there other than us. Team, are there any other, oh yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the questions were answered. They were saying, how do southern states purge voters? Southern states will purge voters if you miss 2 consecutive federal elections. In some states, you go on the inactive list, which is really a pre-purge list. Other states are being very, very aggressive. Texas was very aggressive this year. Anyone who missed 2 federal elections got dumped from the Texas voter roll. And again, they do not call it a voter purge. They claim that they are maintaining their voter files. Well, when you dump hundreds of thousands of people from the voting rolls and there's really no notice or either very little notice, that looks like, feels like a purge to me. And then there was a question, are Black voters voting in higher percentages in those elections? When we look at Georgia, the numbers in Georgia for Reverend Warnock were really, really, really incredible. They were great. When we look at South Carolina for Tim Scott, no, the numbers weren't particularly good at all, because again, Black voters tend to go toward Democrats. So even though Tim Scott was Black, it wasn't really the Black vote that put him in office. So it's very, very interesting when we have candidates that are good at reaching out to their community and really engage the community seems to respond. And yeah, there is the note, I read that in Maryland, Westmore, who's African American, won the Democratic primary for governor. So we are seeing a major bump in African American candidates winning primaries and being on the ticket for statewide office. So this is pretty historic.
And Andrea, there's a question in the chat about where are the democracy centers located and what do they do?
The democracy centers right now are located in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and we currently have 3 official democracy centers that we operate in the great state of Georgia. Democracy centers go in communities, they're very localized, where 55% or more of the Black, or they could be Hispanic or AA and HPI community no longer votes. They're registered, they just don't vote. And so that is where we partner with people that are trusted partners in the community. And what they do is they hold events, they engage the community year round. So it's not when the election is over, they disappear, never to be seen again until 3 months before the next election. These folks are always there. When they work on knocking on doors and talking to voters, at one part of the year, they're talking to voters about what are their pain points, what are their issues. And I'm going, I have no idea why I'm talking about the democracy centers when the democracy center leader happens to be here. So Frank, can you come on camera and give us maybe 2 minutes? Sorry, I was busy stealing your thunder. Unmute. Up. I got you, Frank. You're co-host now. You can unmute. There you go.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Andrea, for allowing me to just have a few more minutes here to expand on the Democracy Center program. Andrea's pretty much covered all of the fundamental aspects of the Democracy Center program, and she left off at my favorite talking point, which is addressing the pain points and how we spend a great deal of the year making sure that we understand the individual community needs. Every individual is different. I mean, excuse me, every community is different, and we have to really understand that by conducting surveys and going into organizations and churches and places where we know our people are having questions and conversations about what's going on in the community. Those are the opportunities that we take to engage them and then provide them with resources. A thing that is key about our democracy centers is that we are using individuals that are from the community that can recognize the needs of each of those individual communities, but we're also looking at the partnerships that those individuals have already created in those communities and expanding on those by making sure that there are resources at their fingertips, either the ones that they already localized or the national ones that we can bring forth. This allows us to be able to address and alleviate some of those pain points and then get them to start focusing on the circumstances that they are in and some of the legislation or the elected officials that are part of the reason why they are in those circumstances. Now we can start talking to them about why they need to vote, why their voice will always matter, will always count. And it doesn't matter. I saw a question in the chat earlier, excuse me, about whether or not Black voters turn out specifically if they're Black candidates. We vote on the issues. And what individuals want to hear about is what is going to change about their individual lives. And so regardless of the candidates, we're not a monolithic voting block. What we look at is how can we improve the quality of our lives? And sometimes that can be done by just providing resources, but a lot of that times that comes with changing legislation, and we can show them how. There's training that we offer, and then of course, getting out the vote, offering rides, creating that volunteer network to make sure that individuals are informed about the issues, informed about who and what's on the ballot, and making sure they have access to the polls.
Thank you very, very much, Frank. The NAACP, the Atlanta NAACP did a survey after the 2020 election, and they surveyed Black voters who did not vote in the 2020 election, and they wanted to know why they didn't vote. The three top reasons were, number one, I didn't know where the voting was. Voters who are older, voters who are rural, voters who are poor and can't afford the internet, can't find out in many instances where early voting is. Early voting is exclusively on the internet. You need the internet to find early voting. It's not on your voter registration card. When your polling place closes, not all states will reissue a new voter registration card simply because your poll has closed. So when polls close, again, voters without the internet don't know where the new polling location is. Again, older voters, rural voters, low-income voters. It used to be back in the day, there was always an effort made to locate a polling location on a public transit line. In many southern cities, there is very little public transportation. And in many instances, they no longer make a point of putting the polling location on a public transit line. So that means if people don't have a ride to the polls, they're not going to get there. So in Virginia, in North Carolina, in Florida, in Texas, we are partnering with Rideshare to Vote. Their call in line to request a ride is manned 18 hours a day. So we will be able to get people to the polls if they want to get there. So a little bit later on, we will be requesting volunteer drivers. As a matter of fact, if it's not already on the volunteer form, I'm going to add it. And we're using Rideshare to Vote in the places where their service is available, because they provide an app for drivers so you know who you're supposed to pick up, and B, they actually provide special insurance for drivers who are driving people on election day, and you may be running around in areas of your city or your state where you're really not all that familiar. So we want to make sure that everybody's got adequate insurance. And I'm seeing notes about vote writer cards. We are making sure that our democracy centers have all the information they need to ensure that any voter who wants to vote will know where the voting is, be able to get there, and know if voter ID is required, what kind of ID they need to bring with them. So again, we are all about education. Is there anything I missed in the chat? Because the chat has been busy tonight. No. The top three reasons people didn't vote. I didn't know where the voting was. I couldn't get there. And a distant third, I didn't like any of the candidates. So that hurt my heart that people didn't know where to vote and couldn't get there. We can fix that. Can't do much about 3, although hopefully we are going to see some candidates that inspire people. And yes, Ride Share to Vote is providing rides from early voting all the way through election day. Yes. We are redoing the slide because people found it confusing. I will just talk about the effectiveness of postcarding. And this is not postcarding in general. This is our postcarding. Number one, because we only postcard BIPOC voters, we have designed our own postcards, which are both culturally and racially inspiring. Sending a blank postcard to BIPOC voters is probably not going to have the same impact as the postcards that have been specifically designed for voters of color, so they see themselves participating in voting. Also, messaging. I got a postcard from a political campaign, and I live here in Virginia, and we have 45 days of early voting. And that postcard said, "Oh, vote on November 8th." I mean, yes, I know exactly where I'm going to vote. I also know Virginia has 45 days of early voting, and I normally vote within the first 3 days of early voting. So we make sure that our messaging is clear, our messaging is accurate, and we make sure we give people a working phone number so that if they have a question and they don't have a computer or the internet, they can call their local registrar, board of elections, whatever it is, and get their questions answered. Most organizations are not willing to go to that time and trouble of looking up and verifying the phone number for every registrar for each county. So everything that we do, our phone banks, our text banks, and our postcards are done by county. We generally do not give generic statewide information. We give county specific information. We understand that many of the voters that we are reaching out to are low income, and they do not have the time, the skill, or the expertise to go on a mission to find out information about voting. So we make sure that everything is right there at their fingertips. We provide a service to voters. We're not selling them anything. We're providing a service. And yes, thank you, Nancy. We also do not make up the issues that go on our postcards, our phone banks, and our text banks. As Frank said, we survey people in the community and we talk to them about their pain points and what's important. And we remind them that this is what you told us was important to you. And we remind them this is where you're voting. And we kind of work to get voting out of this prom king, prom queen kind of scenario. And again, let people be issue voters. This is what is important to me and my community. All right. Okay.
Andrea, there were a few more
Yes.
questions. There were questions about registration, that issue of purged voters, and also postcard effectiveness and something
Oh,
else.
right. I was supposed to do with postcard effectiveness.
Oh, and are the rides provided during early voting? The rides to
Yes,
the polls?
yes. The rides to the polls are early voting through election day. And we do not, our democracy centers, because they do events, they will do voter registration. We do not do voter registration as a remote operation because the voter registration data in NGP van is so poor and so inaccurate. So the democracy centers will register voters because they are on the ground and in the community. We no longer attempt to call deregistered voters or postcard them because it turned out that the van information was wildly incorrect and 25% of the people we contacted had not been deregistered. Van was just wrong. So we don't waste the postage. We concentrate on voters who are still registered, but haven't been voting. And they are again in states where if they don't vote in this election, they are going to get removed from the rolls. So again, there are so many organizations that are out there where all they do is they specialize in registering voters. So that's fine. Turnout stats for postcard. Let me see what I'm reading. From 5 to 25. Yeah. All right. 40%. Oh, that's not an increase. ROV and the slides that we're working on and we're rebuilding. When we were postcarding unregistered voters in Onslow County in 2019, on average, 3 new voters registered per month. 40 days after we sent our, we need you to check your registration because it looks as though you are no longer registered to vote. 80 people registered to vote. So there were 309 people out of 309 people, 79 people re-registered to vote. So that was 26% of the people we contacted re-registered. Again, we didn't hear from the other people we contacted, so we don't know if it turns out they really were registered and didn't need to re-register, or maybe they just didn't want to register, or possibly among the moved to another county or something else. Now, when we looked at Petersburg, Virginia, which is the last set of numbers that we really looked at. So that was 2021. There were 6,300 voters in Petersburg where we had no phone number. So the only contact they were going to get from us was a postcard. We sent postcards to 6,300 voters. 2,600 of them voted. That was 43% of the people we postcarded voted. Petersburg is one of those communities where people really aren't going to try to door knock it per se because it's dangerous. It's a very low income community. And we knew basically we were really the only people working in Petersburg because I used to live one county over from Petersburg and I had friends there. All right, so that's that. All right, yes, I'm seeing very lovely comments about Gabe's phone banks, which are really truly wonderful. All right, yes. Okay, am I good? Increase in voter turnout. It's very different. Well, we don't know that we can say it's from the postcards. We'd have to figure it out. Let me go back to Petersburg. Petersburg, in 2017 gubernatorial election, voter turnout was 42%. Petersburg 2021, voter turnout 64%. We're the only ones there.
We are doing some kind of controlled tests in Florida, even as we speak. So we took some of the voters in 3 different counties and held those addresses back. And we'll just see after the August 23rd primary, we'll know in a couple of months who voted. But that's a little bit more of a controlled experiment than we've done in the past. And we'll do more of those in other states as well.
No, we're not going to do a lot of those because I am not willing to sacrifice voters to come up with statistics. So no, we will do that on a very, very, very limited basis, very limited. We will not do it at all in Georgia. Well, actually, we found some counties that are outside the area where our partners want to work. And we're like, well, our partners aren't working there. We will try these counties. Again, I have a big problem sacrificing voters for the purpose solely of generating statistics. I think that's evil. Petersburg just was one of those circumstances where it worked out. We could look at the numbers. And since we were the only ones there and we were the only ones in Onslow County, we knew for sure this is the result of our work. In many of these other localities, there are 5, 10, 15 organizations literally working in the same place. How is Group A being able to say that the turnout was really a result of what they did if there were multiple organizations there? So, yeah. All right. Now, texting. Oh, see, I was going to let you go early. Boy, you folks have the best questions. All right, texting. We plan to text this year 7 million voters. I upped it from 3.3 million to 7 million because with the texting platforms that we use, Outreach Circles spoke, and we're going to give Fast peer-to-peer another test. We are generally able to reach between 500 and 1,000 voters an hour. We should be able to build an army of at least 200 texters, which realistically, as we spread it out, is going to be about all it's going to take to reach 7 million voters across a 2.5 month period, because we do text 7 days a week. So that one's going to be very, very interesting. And I'm thinking we may have fewer than 9.3 million cell numbers because we've already texted Georgia for the primary. So that means we are going to have a very clean list of only voters that are willing to hear from us. So those numbers are going to go down, but the efficacy should shoot way, way up. Let me get it in present mode. That's why it's not going anywhere. See, folks get me so excited. There we are. Now, we are also recruiting people to, if you are going to be at the polls, or even if you're not, if you are going to vote or driving by a place where people are voting and you see something very strange going on, we are currently getting See Something, Say Something 2022 ready, and we will be rolling that out for the Florida primary. You can see it operates on a computer on your phone. You indicate what the problem is, write a description, and then it posts it on a map. So this is an image of the 2020 election. So the new one will be say 2022. And this shows color-coded the kind of incidents that occurred across the country. And now with Say Something, Say Something, people will be able to include a photograph. They will also be able to include a video. So once we release it, we will also be looking to train people to be CSA monitors, meaning you will sign up for a shift and then you will monitor the posts that come in and make sure we don't have people trying to post garbage and junk and see something, say something. So links that you're going to need, postcards. If you want to look more at our postcard program, centerforcommonground.org/postcarding. If you want a phone bank, centerforcommonground.org/phone banks. And if you want to text for us, centerforcommonground.org/texting. And when you sign up to text, we're going to ask, do you use any of the 3 texting platforms that we've listed? And then that will help us determine how many texting classes and what product we're going to need to offer to get people ready to text. We will be coming right back to Florida next week. I will be joined by Senator Chevron Jones, who is the founder of Operation Blackout in Florida. And I will also see if any of our table partners from Florida State Voices can join us and give a little more insight into a state with 13 million voters. So that's the end of my presentation. It is 9 o'clock on the nose. I am going to thank you all so very much for joining us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, if you have any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer your questions for the next few minutes. I'm going to turn off the recording.